Liam Ryder trudged through the endless blizzard, the freezing wind biting at his skin as he fought against the storm. The icy landscape stretched out around him, a vast white void with nothing in sight except snow and more snow. His boots crunched into the thick layer of frozen powder with each step, and the snowflakes stung his face like tiny needles. The storm had come out of nowhere. One minute, he was tracking a downed freighter in the area, and the next, his transport had been engulfed by the blizzard. He had barely enough time to grab his emergency survival kit before the winds knocked the ship's comms offline and the navigation systems went haywire. Now, his survival depended on finding shelter before the cold froze him solid. Liam had been in worse situations before. He had served in combat zones across multiple systems, fought off raiders and hostile aliens, and survived environments that could strip a man's bones down to dust. But this storm, this blizzard was unlike anything he had ever encountered. The cold wasn't just physical. It was an oppressive force, as if the entire planet was pushing against him, trying to swallow him whole. Through the haze of snow, something caught his eye. At first, he thought it was just a trick of the storm, an illusion created by the swirling white mass, but as he focused, he saw it clearly. Two small, shadowy figures huddled together on the ground, barely visible under the thick blanket of snow. Liam's heart skipped a beat. He wasn't the type to go out of his way for anyone. But this wasn't just any situation. There was something about the way the figures lay there, unmoving, that tugged at something deep inside him. He had to help. His boots dug into the snow as he sprinted toward them, the wind howling in his ears. He reached the figures and knelt down beside them, his breath coming out in ragged gasps. They weren't human, at least, not entirely. The first child was a girl, her skin a pale lavender color, almost translucent in the blizzard's eerie light. Her hair, a shimmering silver white, lay frozen against her face, and her wide, alien eyes stared up at him, unblinking. The second child, a boy, lay next to her, his features almost identical, except for the deep blue hue of his skin. Liam didn't hesitate. He grabbed the girl first, pulling her into his arms. She was light, too light for someone her size, and her skin was cold, colder than anything he had ever felt. Her pulse was weak but steady. He quickly wrapped her in the thermal blanket he had taken from his emergency kit and moved to the boy. He didn't know who these kids were or why they were out here, but they were alive, and that was enough for him. Liam's heart raced as he glanced around. The storm was worsening, and he could barely make out the shape of his downed transport in the distance. It was his only shot at shelter. But the blizzard made it impossible to navigate more than a few yards in any direction. He gritted his teeth and hoisted the boy into his arms, wrapping him in another blanket. The children were fragile, their bodies not built for this kind of cold. Every second counted. With the children clutched to his chest, Liam pushed forward, moving toward the wrecked transport. His feet slipped and slid in the snow, but his determination didn't waver. The blizzard made everything harder, and the cold gnawed at his bones, but he pressed on. He couldn't leave them out here to die. Not like this. Minutes later, he reached the wreckage, feeling the burn of exhaustion in his legs. The transport's side door was half buried in snow, but it wasn't completely blocked. Liam pushed against it with all his strength, the metal groaning in protest as it gave way. He stumbled inside, collapsing against the wall. The air inside the wreck was still, the temperature a little warmer than outside, but not by much. He laid the children down gently on the cold floor and quickly began checking their vitals. The girl's pulse was still weak, but steady. The boy was the same, though his breathing was shallow. Liam wasn't sure how long they had been out in the storm, but he could tell they were on the verge of hypothermia. If he didn't act fast, they wouldn't survive the night. He fumbled through his survival kit, pulling out a portable heater and placing it between them. He set it to its lowest setting and huddled close to the children, trying to shield them from the worst of the storm. The wind outside howled louder, the ship's metal frame creaking as it strained against the force of the blizzard. Liam had only a few hours before the storm would drain what little energy he had left. But as he sat there, his mind racing, he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. These children, they were far from ordinary. The girl's skin shimmered like something out of a dream, and the boy's eyes, bright blue and glowing faintly, held a deep, otherworldly intelligence. Liam wasn't a scientist. Hell, he wasn't even a good talker. But he had learned enough in his travels to know that these kids were no ordinary species. They were alien, maybe from another star system entirely. He couldn't help but wonder why they were out here, alone in the middle of a deadly storm. And why had they collapsed in the snow? As he sat there, watching the children slowly regain consciousness, Liam heard something distant at first, but growing louder. The sound of engines, deep and powerful. Cutting through the howling wind, Liam stiffened, his hand instinctively going to the blaster holstered at his side. 4 vehicles, moving fast, heading in his direction. He had no doubt who they were. He had seen this before. Hunters, mercenaries, bounty hunters, whoever they were, they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. And right now, what they wanted was those children. The thought of what might happen to them made his blood run cold. These kids weren't just helpless, they were valuable. To the wrong people, they could be worth a fortune, a weapon of unimaginable power. Liam knew what he had to do. He couldn't stay here and wait for them to find him. He had to move. But there was no way he could carry the children and outrun 4 vehicles in a blizzard. His only option was to make a stand. With a final glance at the kids, he grabbed his blaster and headed for the rear hatch. The sound of the engines grew louder. Closer now. Liam's instincts kicked in. He wasn't going to let anyone take these children without a fight. Not if he had anything to say about it. The blizzard howled around him as he stepped outside, the snow nearly blinding him. He crouched behind a pile of snowdrifts, his eyes scanning the horizon. The vehicles were closing in fast, and Liam had to act quickly. He had no idea who they were, but he knew one thing. They were coming for the kids. And he wasn't about to let that happen. He breathed in deeply, steadying himself. His hand tightened around his blaster, and he waited. The moment they got within range, he would make his move. He just hoped he could keep the kids safe long enough for backup to arrive. Liam's breath was ragged as he crouched behind the snowdrift, his eyes fixed on the distant shapes of the 4 vehicles closing in. The wind howled, stinging his face, but he barely felt it anymore. His mind was laser-focused on the approaching convoy. He had no idea who they were or what they wanted. But he knew one thing for sure. They weren't here for a friendly chat. The vehicles were massive, built for harsh terrain and extreme conditions, just like the one Liam had crashed. They moved with purpose, their lights cutting through the blizzard like knives, sharp and steady. They were heading straight for his position, and it wouldn't be long before they saw his transport. Liam glanced back at the wreckage of his ship, half buried in snow. The 2 children lay inside, still unconscious but alive. He had to buy them time. He had to make sure they didn't get their hands on the kids. Whoever they were, they didn't just want to help. They wanted to take them. He checked his blaster again, making sure it was fully charged. He had enough ammo for a few shots, but that was about it. He didn't have the luxury of a long fight. He needed to take them out, or at the very least, delay them long enough for the kids to get a head start. Liam's mind raced as he calculated his next move. There were 4 of them, maybe more, if there were other soldiers in the vehicles. He didn't know what kind of backup they had, but he knew one thing. These weren't the kind of people you talk to. They were here to take what they wanted, and if they found the kids, they wouldn't hesitate to kill. The sound of the engines grew louder, and Liam tightened his grip on the blaster. His pulse quickened, but he forced himself to stay calm. He couldn't afford to panic. Not now. Not when the lives of 2 innocent children were at stake. The first SUV came into view, its headlights cutting through the snow like a spotlight. Liam's heart skipped a beat as he recognized the insignia on the side of the vehicle. A black flag with a red circle and a strange symbol inside it. A mercenary group. They were known throughout the galaxy for hunting down rare and valuable creatures, selling them to the highest bidder. Liam had crossed paths with them once before, back when he was still a soldier, but he had never seen them this far out on the fringe of known space. The other 3 vehicles followed closely behind, their engines roaring as they cut through the snow. The convoy slowed as it reached the wreckage, and Liam's stomach twisted. They were almost there. He had to act now. Without a second thought, Liam darted from his cover, moving quickly and quietly through the snow. He needed to get into position before they could see him. His mind was already working on a plan. The blaster was good for a few shots, but he couldn't rely on it alone. He needed something more. Something they wouldn't expect. The wind howled, masking his movements as he sprinted to the side of the wrecked transport. His boots sank into the deep snow, making it hard to move quickly. But he gritted his teeth and pushed on. The first SUV stopped about 20 meters away from him, the sound of its engine rumbling through the storm. The door opened, and a tall figure stepped out, his silhouette barely visible in the blizzard. Liam didn't wait. He ducked low, grabbing a jagged piece of metal from the wreckage. It was heavy, but it would do the job. He crept closer to the SUV, staying in the shadows of the snowdrifts. The mercenary's attention was focused on the transport, but Liam knew better than to assume he was safe. One wrong move, and this whole thing would go sideways. He reached the vehicle's side and, with a quick motion, tossed the metal shard under the wheels. The SUV lurched, the driver cursing as he slammed on the brakes. The vehicle skidded to a stop, its engine sputtering. The mercenary's attention snapped back to the wreckage, and he shouted for backup. Liam didn't give him a chance to react. He was already moving, darting toward the other side of the convoy. The snow was thick, but his training had taught him how to move in environments like this. He could blend into the storm, using it as his cover. The second vehicle came to a halt, and 2 more mercenaries stepped out, their eyes scanning the area. They didn't see him. Not yet. But Liam knew it wouldn't take long before they figured out something was wrong. He had to act fast. He moved again, this time heading for the rear of the convoy. His heart was pounding in his chest, but his mind was clear. He could hear the mercenaries shouting orders, their voices barely audible over the storm. They were getting organized. He had to make sure they didn't get too close to the transport. He couldn't let them find the kids. Not yet. Liam spotted a rock formation just ahead, half buried in snow. It would give him cover and a clear line of sight to the convoy. He sprinted toward it, the snow stinging his face, the wind tugging at his clothes. Behind him, the mercenaries were moving closer. They were almost there. He reached the rock formation and crouched behind it, taking a deep breath. His pulse was steady now, his focus sharp. He peeked around the edge, just enough to see the convoy's movements. The mercenaries were already spreading out, their guns drawn. They were looking for him. He couldn't hide forever. Then, he heard something that made his blood run cold. The sound of engines revving. Another vehicle was approaching. This one wasn't like the others. It was sleeker, faster, clearly built for a different kind of mission. Liam's eyes narrowed as he recognized the insignia on the vehicle. It wasn't just any mercenary group. It was Varric. Varric was one of the leaders of the cartel that ran the operation, and he was known for his ruthlessness. If he was here, it meant the mission had just escalated. The children weren't just valuable, they were essential. Liam had no idea what they were, but now he understood that they were worth far more than he had originally thought. And Varric would stop at nothing to get them. Liam's mind raced. He couldn't take on Varric and his entire crew alone. Not without backup. He had to find a way to hold them off. Buy the children enough time to escape. The human fleet was still hours away. But if he could just keep them distracted long enough, maybe there was a chance. Varric's vehicle came to a stop, and the door opened. A tall figure stepped out, his dark cloak billowing in the wind. Varric. He was taller than Liam remembered, his face cold and calculating, like a predator surveying its prey. He didn't look surprised to see the wreckage. He had clearly expected this. He walked toward the wrecked transport with deliberate steps, his eyes scanning the surroundings. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to take what he wanted. Liam's grip on his blaster tightened. This was it. There was no turning back now. If he didn't act fast, the children would be gone. And he would be dead. As Varric approached the wreckage, Liam made his move. He sprinted out from behind the rocks, his blaster raised. The first shot rang out, hitting one of the mercenaries in the chest. The man dropped like a stone, and the others spun around. Surprised. Liam didn't give them a chance to recover. He fired again, taking out another mercenary. The chaos erupted. Varric shouted orders, and the remaining mercenaries returned fire. But Liam was already on the move, dodging behind rocks and debris. His shots precise and deadly. He couldn't take them all out, but he could slow them down. The storm howled around him, the wind whipping through his hair, as he fought to keep them at bay. The children were still inside the transport, but for how long? He had to keep them distracted. He had to keep them away from the wreckage, but Varric wasn't going to make it easy. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as the wind howled around him, his breath coming in short bursts. He ducked behind another pile of snow and reloaded his blaster, the metal of the weapon cool in his hands. The mercenaries were closing in. They weren't just going to leave. They'd already found his position and were preparing for a full assault. He glanced back toward the wreckage. The children were still inside, safe for now. But how long would that last? The mercenaries were methodical, and Varric was no fool. If they got to the ship, there would be nothing left to protect the kids. Liam had to act, and he had to act fast. His blaster crackled as he fired off another round, hitting a mercenary in the leg. The man dropped with a scream, his comrades returning fire. Liam ducked down, narrowly avoiding a blast that singed his jacket. The cold air stung his skin, but it didn't matter. He couldn't afford to feel the cold. The only thing that mattered right now was keeping the children safe. Varric's voice cut through the chaos, calm and cold, barking orders to his crew. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't panicking. He was a man who knew exactly what he was doing, and that made him all the more dangerous. Liam's mind raced. He couldn't hold them off forever. 4 mercenaries, all armed and trained. And Varric? He was no rookie. He knew how to handle himself in a firefight, and he had the experience to outmaneuver Liam at every turn. As Liam moved to get a better angle, he spotted movement in the corner of his eye. A second group of mercenaries was coming from the east, cutting across the snowstorm. There was no way he could take on both groups. He had to find another way. His eyes fell on the wreckage of his ship again. It wasn't just a hunk of metal, it was a piece of technology. And if he could get to the control panel, there was a chance he could override the ship's systems and lock it down. The idea was risky. He didn't know if the system would even work in the middle of the blizzard. And with the damage the ship had taken, it could be a long shot. But it was his only shot. Liam glanced at the mercenaries again. They were starting to regroup, moving in formation, and that gave him an idea. He couldn't outrun them, but he could make them think he was retreating. He could draw them in, get them to spread out, and then make a move for the wreckage. His eyes narrowed as he spotted a cluster of snowdrifts just beyond the mercenaries' position. If he could make it there undetected, he'd be able to get close to the ship. Liam took a deep breath. This was it. There was no turning back now. He stood up from behind the snowdrift and began running, deliberately kicking up snow behind him to draw their attention. As expected, the mercenaries opened fire, their shots cutting through the snow and hitting the ground all around him. But Liam didn't stop. He kept running, as fast as he could, weaving left and right to avoid their aim. Behind him, he heard the crack of gunfire and the shouts of the mercenaries. They were following him. They thought they had him cornered. But that was exactly what Liam wanted. He made sure to keep just out of their range, always staying one step ahead, making them chase him through the storm. He reached the snowdrifts, diving behind them for cover. The mercenaries, thinking they had him, continued their pursuit, moving in tighter and closer. It was the perfect distraction. From his position behind the snowdrifts, Liam could see the wreckage of his ship through the howling snow. The ship was just a few dozen meters away, and he could almost hear the soft hum of the emergency power still running. Now was his chance. Liam pushed himself up, using the cover of the snowdrifts and the chaos to get closer to the wreckage. The snow was deep, but he had to keep moving. He couldn't afford to hesitate now. His legs burned as he sprinted through the thick snow. His eyes focused on the ship ahead. He reached the ship, ducking low behind the damaged hull. His heart hammered in his chest. The mercenaries were still too far off to notice him yet, but that wouldn't last long. He quickly made his way to the access panel on the side of the ship. He pulled out his multi-tool, a simple device that he always kept with him for situations like this. He had no idea if the ship's systems would be functional, but he didn't have a choice. He had to try. Liam worked quickly, his fingers numbing in the cold, as he pried open the access panel and connected the multi-tool to the ship's console. The screen flickered for a moment before coming to life, and Liam breathed a small sigh of relief. The system was still operational. He quickly navigated through the menus, trying to find the lockdown command. It wasn't easy. His hands were shaking from the cold, and the storm outside made it hard to focus. But he didn't have much time. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the screen blinked green. The ship's systems were locked down. The emergency doors slammed shut, sealing off the wreckage from the outside. It wouldn't hold for long, but it was a start. Liam didn't waste any time. He pulled his multi-tool out of the console and backed away from the ship, quickly scanning the area for any sign of movement. The mercenaries were still approaching, but they hadn't noticed the ship was locked down yet. He moved quickly, silently, making his way toward a small rise in the terrain to get a better view. From here, he could see everything. The mercenaries were still closing in on the wreck, but their focus had shifted. They weren't expecting the ship to be locked down. They hadn't seen the children inside. Liam's chest tightened as he realized just how close they were to discovering the truth. He couldn't let that happen. He couldn't let them get to the kids. But then, just as he was about to make his next move, he heard it. The sound of a distant engine, louder than the rest. It was the unmistakable sound of a larger vehicle, something built for combat, a heavy dropship. Liam cursed under his breath. This wasn't just a simple mercenary operation. They had backup coming. And if that dropship landed, they would have the firepower to wipe him out in seconds. He looked at the wreckage of the transport. The ship's emergency systems had locked down, but it wouldn't keep the mercenaries out forever. They would find a way in. Liam's eyes narrowed. He had to buy the kids more time. He had to make a stand. The wind was picking up again, the snow swirling around him, but Liam was already thinking ahead. He wouldn't be able to hold them off forever, but he could give the kids a chance. If the ship was locked down, it was their only safe place, and if the mercenaries wanted it, they would have to get through him first. Liam moved toward the wreckage again, his mind already racing with the plan. The mercenaries were getting closer, but he was ready. He wasn't going to let them take the children. Not without a fight. He took one last breath, steadying himself, as the sound of the approaching dropship grew louder. The battle was only just beginning. The sound of the approaching dropship echoed through the storm. Louder now, its engines roaring like a beast, hungry for prey. Liam's stomach twisted as he watched the distant sky, the massive vessel cutting through the swirling blizzard like a dark shadow. It was close, too close. The mercenaries were almost at the wrecked transport. Liam's chest tightened as he quickly calculated his options. The ship was locked down, but the mercenaries would find a way inside eventually. If they reached the wreckage, they'd find the children. They wouldn't hesitate to take them, or worse. The wind howled around him, but Liam's mind was sharp, focused. He wasn't going to let them take the kids. Not if he could help it. He glanced over at the wreckage. The emergency doors were still sealed, but he knew they wouldn't stay that way for long. The mercenaries would figure it out soon enough. The dropship was nearly here. There wasn't much time. Liam crouched low behind a snowdrift, his breath coming in sharp bursts. The storm was biting, the cold gnawing at him, but it didn't matter. His focus was on one thing, keeping the children safe. His grip tightened on his blaster. If he could hold them off long enough, maybe the human fleet would arrive in time. But the window was closing fast. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of shouting. The mercenaries had reached the ship. The leader, Varric, was barking orders to his men, gesturing toward the wreckage. They were closing in, moving in tighter circles. They were searching for any way in, any weak point they could exploit. Liam's heart raced. He had to keep them distracted, keep them away from the ship. He peeked over the snowdrift, his eyes scanning the area. The dropship was close now, the thrum of its engines almost deafening. There was no way he could take on the mercenaries and the dropship at once. He needed a plan, fast. His gaze flicked to the wreckage again. He couldn't let them get to the children. They were too valuable. But what were they? Really? He had no answers. He didn't even know where they came from. All he knew was that they weren't just any kids. They were something special, and the mercenaries wanted them badly. Liam's fingers tightened around the grip of his blaster. It was time. He stood up, stepping out from behind the snowdrift. The wind whipped around him, but he barely noticed it. His only focus was the mercenaries. They were distracted. Varric had his back turned, surveying the wreckage as his men worked to find a way inside. It was the perfect moment. Liam raised his blaster and fired, the shot ringing through the storm. One of the mercenaries collapsed, hitting the snow with a thud. The others spun around, their guns drawn. But it was too late. Liam was already on the move, darting toward a new position behind another pile of snow. The mercenaries fired back, but their shots were wild. Their aim thrown off by the chaos of the storm and Liam's unpredictable movements. He didn't wait to see if they were hit. He sprinted toward the wreckage. His mind focused entirely on one thing: keeping the children safe. The emergency doors were still locked, but the ship's outer panels were exposed. The mercenaries would be able to breach it if they tried hard enough. Liam slid behind the wreckage, pulling himself up to a higher position where he could see the whole scene unfold. The mercenaries had regrouped, spreading out in a tighter formation. Varric was still barking orders, his calm, cold voice cutting through the storm, but his eyes were scanning the wreckage now, his gaze narrowing as he pieced together what Liam was trying to do. "Find him," Varric ordered, his voice filled with cold fury. "He's not getting away with this. Not with the kids." Liam's heart pounded. He was running out of time. He had to make the mercenaries think he was retreating, give them the illusion of victory so they'd move toward the ship. Once they did, he could strike. The dropship was almost overhead now, its engines roaring like a monster preparing to land. Liam's eyes narrowed as he made a snap decision. It was now or never. He fired a shot into the air, the blast ringing out across the battlefield. The mercenaries froze, momentarily distracted by the noise. Liam used the opportunity to make a dash for it, sprinting toward the side of the wrecked ship. The snow crunched beneath his feet as he ran, but he didn't look back. He couldn't afford to, the mercenaries shouted, realizing too late that they had been lured away from the wreckage. But it was too late for them to stop him now. Liam reached the side of the ship and slid behind it, taking cover just as the dropship touched down in the snow with a deafening roar. Liam's eyes darted around, his mind working quickly. The dropship was too close. He couldn't fight off that kind of firepower. But the children inside, they were the key. If he could get them to use their abilities, they could stop the mercenaries. They were more powerful than they seemed. The storm howled around him, but Liam's heart was steady now. He had a plan. He pulled out a small communicator from his pocket, activating the signal. His voice was low as he spoke into it. "This is Ryder. I need backup. Now. Target coordinates sent. Time's running out." He didn't wait for a reply. There wasn't time. The mercenaries were already closing in again, their weapons raised. Varric was leading the charge, his eyes sharp as he scanned the area. Liam could hear him shouting orders, trying to get his men into position. It wouldn't be long before they spotted him. But just as Liam prepared for another firefight, he heard something soft at first. a distant hum. But it grew louder, a low, melodic sound, like the wind itself was speaking. Liam's eyes widened in realization. The children were awake. The hum intensified. A soft, almost ethereal sound that seemed to resonate through the snow and the storm. Liam felt it in his chest. The power of it, like a pulse beneath the surface of the planet itself. The children, both of them, were standing, their eyes glowing faintly. Their hands were raised, palms out, and the air around them shimmered with energy. The mercenaries froze, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear as the children's power filled the air. Liam knew what was happening. The children were awakening to their abilities. They were going to stop the mercenaries. Varric cursed under his breath, his eyes narrowing as he realized what was happening. He pulled his blaster, but it was already too late. The children's energy expanded outward, a ripple of force that sent the mercenaries flying back. The snow around them lifted in a swirling vortex, and Liam had to shield his eyes against the sudden burst of light. The air crackled with raw power, and the wind howled even louder, as if nature itself was reacting to the children's energy. Varric screamed in fury, but his voice was drowned out by the crackling force. His mercenaries were scattered, thrown to the ground, unable to recover as the children's power surged through the storm. Liam took a step forward, watching in awe as the children stood, their bodies glowing with energy. They weren't helpless. Not at all. They were something more, something powerful. The dropship's engines roared again. But it was already too late for the mercenaries. The children's energy surged, knocking the dropship off course. The vessel crashed into the snow, its hull groaning under the force of the impact. Varric and his men were retreating, scrambling for cover. But the storm was too strong now. The children had shown their power, and the mercenaries had no chance against them. Liam stood there, watching the children as they collapsed to their knees, their energy spent. The storm began to subside, the wind dying down as if the planet itself had exhaled in relief. Liam took a deep breath. They were safe, for now. The mercenaries were gone, and the children had shown their power. But the question still lingered. Who were they? Really? Where had they come from? As he walked back toward the wreckage, the children were silent, their eyes dimming. But Liam knew one thing. He had to protect them. Whatever they were, whatever their powers were, they were his responsibility now. And he wouldn't let anyone take them. The storm had passed, but the fight was far from over.